This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Okay, so here's the thing. I love Into the Woods, and I guess I had to substantiate that somehow, so here we are. But I appreciate that it's not everybody's favorite, and even if you do like it, it might have been a while since you last saw it. So just so everyone's on the same page here, let's briefly go over what happens in this show. So it opens and we have like 17 and a half fairy tales all happening at the same time. Cinderella wants to have a night out on the town and try her hand at maybe getting lucky. There's Jack, who wants his bovine best friend Milky White to be able to produce some milk, otherwise his mother's gonna force him to sell her. But the cow isn't able to cut it, and Jack's mother makes him go through the woods in order to get to the next village over to sell the cow. Then there's Little Red Riding Hood, who wants to deliver bread to her granny in the woods. And finally, arguably the central characters of the show, the baker and his wife, who want to have a kid but can't. And why is that? Well, fertility is a complicated subject. I'm just kidding. It's because the witch next door put a curse on the baker's family after the baker's dad stole some beans from the witch's garden. Duh. Because in retaliation, the witch cursed the baker's family so he can't have kids. And she stole the baker's older sister, who turns out to be Rapunzel, and has no idea about any of this, because of course. And if the baker wants to reverse the curse, then the witch tells him that he'll have to go out and get 4 items. Namely, Cinderella's slipper, Jack's cow, Little Red Riding Hood's Little Red Riding Hood, and Rapunzel's hair. Some shenanigans happen. Long story short, Cinderella goes to the ball, falls in love with the prince. Jack climbs a beanstalk and becomes rich by coming back with treasures from the land of the giants and chops down the beanstalk, which also ends up killing the giant in the process. Rapunzel runs away with her own prince and has babies after fixing her prince's eyesight by crying into his face. That actually happens.
As he approached, Rapunzel, overjoyed at seeing him, fell into his arms weeping. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and their touch restored his vision.
And the baker and his wife are successful, and lo and behold, the baker's wife is pregnant. And the witch is young and beautiful again, but all at the cost of her powers. End of Act 1. Act 2 opens with everyone singing about how they're happily ever after isn't actually so happily ever after. They're like fairy tale hungover or something. Cinderella doesn't like being stuck in the castle all day, and Jack and his mother are loaded now, but Jack misses the land of the giants, and his mother is still really overprotective. The baker and his wife now don't have enough room because of the baby, and now want and or need a bigger house. And all this complaining is just in time for the giant's wife to come along and start crushing the village to avenge her husband's death. Her husband was the giant that Jack killed when he chopped down the beanstalk. And this is where things go buck wild. All of the stories completely intersect and characters start dying. The cast breaks the fourth wall and sacrifices the narrator to try and appease the giant's wife, who wants to kill Jack as an act of retribution.
A big mistake!
Nonsense.
There must always be an outside observer to pass the story along.
Some of us don't like the way you've been telling it.
Jack's mom is killed by one of the prince's stewards for trying to defend her son against the giant. The giant's wife briefly leaves, trampling and killing Rapunzel in the process. Then everyone splits up. The baker's wife has an affair with Cinderella's prince in the middle of the woods, right before singing about how she felt about all of it, and is then immediately squashed by the new giant. Little Red Riding Hood's mother and grandmother both get killed by the new giant, along with both of their houses being destroyed. The witch throws away the beans and gets her powers back, but vanishes, like literally just leaves the show because she's fed up with actually put a pin in that because we're going to get to it. And then Cinderella, the baker, Little Red, and Jack all start literally pointing fingers at each other, trying to figure out whose fault this all is. The baker ends up running off, only to find his long-lost father in the woods, who he actually discovered was his father in the first act, but he also died at the end of the first act, so technically this is a kind of spirit, and he convinces the baker to confront the giant with the remaining characters. And together, the 4 remaining characters and the baby come up with a plan and end up killing the new giant. But by that time, the village and the castle are already destroyed, but now they're a family, sort of, and they get to rebuild together, so yay! The end. It's a wild ride, I know, but where things start to get frustrating is how this musical is received. This is a good musical. That is an objective statement, and I will not be taking questions at this time. The subjectivity of art does not exist, and after several years on the internet, I have simply lost the ability to process irony and satire. Okay, but really, the show's great, and it's frustrating that it isn't more popular. And there's unfortunately a really good explanation for it. See, what happened was when it first came out, Into the Woods was nominated for a total of 11 Tonys, because, like I said, it's a good musical and people like it. But it only won 3 of them. That's because Into the Woods went to the 1988 Tonys, and they had to compete with Phantom of the Opera that had already been out on the West End for 2 years, and it completely overshadowed Into the Woods' spotlight. Basically, Into the Woods lost all those other Tonys that it was nominated for to Phantom. But what gets even worse is how it was adapted into a film in 2014. So I know that I kind of have the reputation for being the guy that screams and tears into musical movies, but honestly, I don't really think there's anything I'm going to be able to say about that film that Snugboy didn't already say in his video on the subject. I'll link to his video in the description below. But even so, in an awkward way, when it comes to explaining how and why Into the Woods works, it actually might be easier to explain why the film didn't work. Something I really want to emphasize about the film, what I consider to be a big problem, if not the big problem with the film, is that a lot like this video, it's just not funny. Into the Woods is a funny show. It is packed with gags. This show has my favorite joke from any Broadway show in all of history.
Because of the way you treated me, I'll never be happy.
was just trying to be a good mother.
Now, this isn't just some, oh, make them laugh kind of situation. The humor is kind of the whole point of the show. And for some reason, they decided to play a lot of the jokes straight in the film.
Rapunzel.
Restored his vision.
A warm environment might be just what Milky White needs to produce his milk.
It's a she. How many times must I tell you? Only she's can give milk.
I thought if he were nice and warm, he might produce some milk. It's a she. How many times do I have to tell you that only she's can give milk?
I don't know if it was like they felt like the jokes would only work in a live stage situation and they didn't want to rewrite the jokes for the screen or something, but this kind of completely invalidates the point of the show, like the whole reason the show exists. See, I've heard a lot of people compare Into the Woods to Shrek, and I think that might be one of the best comparisons you can make. See, Into the Woods is a critique of fairy tales. You can argue that it's a criticism of the early Disney movies, but really it's more about the concept of fairy tales in general.
How can I ever thank you?
You can talk to birds.
This is going to get a little depressing, but the point of fairy tales is to distract people from how horrible their lives are. That and like nationalistic pride, but that's a story for another time. Like if you're a medieval peasant and someone tells you a story about how that one time some peasant girl hooked up with a prince from a far off nation and it solved all her problems, you can tell yourself that you have a chance of not spending the rest of your life in filth, even though that isn't true. It's the Annie effect. You tell yourself that even an orphan can get the upper hand in life by just the power of positive thinking and a really rich benefactor, but that's just not reality. Into the Woods seeks to challenge every aspect of these stories. If you pay attention, at the beginning of the story, everyone's wish is pretty selfish. They're only really thinking of themselves and they don't care for how it affects others. Throughout the first act, you're shown how these characters aren't entirely good. In fact, Little Red has a whole line about it at the beginning of the show.
And take extra care with strangers. Even flowers have their dangers. And though scary is exciting, nice is different than good.
Cinderella isn't entirely a great person. If she isn't mindlessly pulling hair, then it's sort of expecting her dead mother's ghost to do things for her only to then constantly change her mind and lead a bunch of people on for 3 straight nights.
Father said be nice, father said be good. That was always their advice. So be nice, Cinderella. Good Cinderella. Nice, good, nice.
She even ends the first act by not making a choice about her own life. She lets the prince choose for her.
Then from out of the blue, and without any guide, you know what your decision is, which is not to decide.
Jack's mother is completely dismissive of all of Jack's feelings, and Jack is a little too airheaded to accept responsibility and take care of his mother. And just like everything else, Little Red Riding Hood literally steals from the baker on her way to give food to her granny. And on multiple occasions, the baker and his wife lie, cheat, steal, and occasionally outright assault other characters to get their own way.
I just wanted to make sure you really love this cape.
And obviously the witch sends Rapunzel to the desert alone to suffer, so like, yeah, she sucks too. But Act 2 kind of serves like a come to Jesus moment. By the end of Act 1, everyone has their wishes granted and you think that they get to live their happily ever after. But Act 2 shows you what a happily ever after would actually look like. Even though they've all had their wishes granted from the first act, it isn't enough and they're still miserable. Mostly because they literally wished for all their problems to be solved and haven't really developed the skills that they'd need to maintain that happily ever after.
Now, you must understand, these were not people familiar with making choices. Their experience in the woods in no way prepared them for a force this great.
And they're made to continue confronting the consequences of their actions right up until people start dying. The second, or third, depending on how you count it, the third to last number in the show has all of the remaining cast pointing fingers at each other trying to figure out whose fault this all is, because none of them accept responsibility, leading to quite possibly my favorite number in all of Broadway history, No One Is Alone.
Only me beside you. Still you're not alone.
A song where the baker, Cinderella, Little Red, and Jack all accept that it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It doesn't even matter if it's morally correct to kill the giant. What matters is that they need to band together if they're gonna make it through this ordeal.
No one acts alone. Careful, no one is alone.
This whole show exists to point out the faults of the traditional Disney princess story. In No One Is Alone, they explicitly say that it's not as black and white as the fairy tales might suggest.
Witches can be right. Giants can be good. You decide what's right. You decide what's good.
But somewhere along the way, most likely Disney being Disney, they completely misinterpreted that message and just went, oh, it's about fairy tales, that should work. Cutting the jokes out of Into the Woods is like cutting all the gags out of Shrek. To some extent, that's kind of the point of the show. At the same time, that's also why people tend to think that the second act always feels a little tacked on. If you look at this like a straight fairy tale, the happily ever after ends at Act 1. If that's how you're watching the film, then everything else just kind of feels like a really awkward and lengthy epilogue instead of the entire point of the show. Now, it's really important, I feel, to understand the moral behind Into the Woods, because I feel like it ties into what the music does in a really cool way. First off, it's important to keep in mind that Into the Woods is a really complicated story. I tried to summarize it and I still missed a lot. The story opens with 12 people on stage and they all want something different. There's the narrator, Cinderella, her two stepsisters, her stepmother and her dad, Jack and his mother, the baker and his wife, the witch, and Little Red Riding Hood, and they're all doing something different. Well, how Sondheim makes sense of all this is that each character sings a modular melody. They all start with I wish, that whole step.
I wish.
In a far-off kingdom,
I wish.
and a childless baker
I wish.
with his
More
wife.
than anything.
And that is a single fragmentary idea, just those two notes that represent their wish, followed by music that is unique to them and their specific wish.
I wish to go to the festival. More than rich. I wish my cow would give us some milk. I wish we had a choice. I want a choice.
If you pay attention, when people come on stage, they tend to be accompanied by music that they've sung. More often than not, it calls back to the music that they sing during their wish.
I wish. It's not for me, it's for my granny in the woods. What happened to your house?
We've had a baking accident.
On top of all of that, there's just a lot of music that reprises. It comes back multiple times. For each of the 3 nights, Cinderella sings the same music but with different lyrics.
He's a very nice prince. And it's a very nice ball. Oh, it's still a nice ball. Yes, and they have far too much food. No, the prince. He's a very smart prince. He's a prince who prepares.
Agony comes back in the second act when the princes sing about the only thing that interests them, strange, vulnerable women stranded in the wilderness.
I found a casket entirely of glass. No, it's unbreakable.
The witch sings this Children Must Listen song 3 separate times throughout the whole show, and pay attention, the lyrics change ever so slightly here each time she sings it.
But did I clearly say, children must listen? No, please. What are you not to do? Children must see. Guide them along the way. Still they won't listen. Careful the things you say.
A young maiden.
Children will listen.
A sad young lad.
And if it isn't large passages, if not entire pieces of music, there's also a lot of smaller thematic material that reappears all the time. And I don't just mean those individual wish motifs.
There are flies in her eyes. There's a lump on her rump, big enough to be a hump.
What can we do for you, sir?
I am here to investigate the destruction that was wrought upon our house today.
Jack has been home with me.
Like, you know how the baker and his wife have that theme for the list of ingredients?
Oh no,
The cow is white as milk, the cape is red as blood, the hair is yellow as corn, the slipper is pure as gold.
What are you doing here?
You forgot your scarf.
Well, listen to what plays when they eventually feed all those ingredients to Milky White.
It's working.
She's milky.
I don't understand.
No, not now. Into the tub, into the tub.
Wait, Father, wait.
And then you have a whole theme for Cinderella whenever she's talking to birds.
Quick little birds, flick through the ashes, pick and peck, but swiftly sift through the ashes. Oh, good friends! What news have you?
You can talk to birds.
That then comes back when the birds are attacking the giant. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive list of either all the themes and motifs or every instance of every motif. I most likely, honestly, absolutely, have missed something that you're probably going to read about in the comment section. This show is absolutely slam-packed with all kinds of fragmentary musical associations between themes, ideas, people, and even items. And that's what really fascinates me about this show. Not necessarily that it's filled with all of these associative musical ideas, because really, all of these themes and motifs, all this musical material really helps stitch the show together. But that they create a really solid through line throughout the show in a way that helps you, as the audience, keep your place and understand what's going on within this absolutely enormous cast with all these intersecting stories going on. Like, who the hell is this? Oh wait, that's Cinderella, because she wants to go to the festival. Right, she just had a costume switch.
I wish to go to the festival more than...
And wait, whose prince is that? Oh right, no, he must have been to the festival because of the brass fanfare. That's Cinderella's prince, right, I got it.
Have you seen a beautiful young woman in a ball gown pass through?
Again, it's difficult to keep track of who's who, and they're all running around like, okay, what the hell are these people doing? Oh, right, they want the cow as red as corn, the hare as yellow as milk. Got it, that's right, these guys have the fetch quest, yeah.
Cow is white as milk, the cape is red as blood, the hair is yellow as corn, the slipper is pure as gold.
But again, this all comes back to usage. While you do have these large sweeping musical numbers that go on and are absolutely wonderful to listen to, some numbers clock in at around or under a minute. As an example, Jack singing I Guess This Is Goodbye is only about 30 seconds long, and then it directly leads into a different number. If you pay attention, there are these wonderful little moments where you have talking interspersed with singing.
Now, go home immediately.
I wish to help.
No, the spell is on my house.
Our house.
Only I can lift the
We
spell.
must lift the prince. What was he like? He's a very nice prince. And it's a very nice ball.
And when they interrupt the dialogue, it tends to be with one of these critical motifs.
Oh no! A cow as white as milk.
These themes and motifs weave throughout the show and create really clear musical associations that don't just tie the musical fabric of the show together, but also help you as the audience maintain a sense of direction in this really dense story. And that doesn't even begin to discuss what is the main musical idea for the whole show, the bean theme. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it plays note for note when the baker trades the beans to Jack. And it shows up all over the place.
Oh, and now let's see if that was the mossy knoll.
Now, having cast out Rapunzel to a remote desert,
I've been worried sick.
Mother, look, the most beautiful harp.
And you can tell that this bean theme ties back to the witch and her curse because it's in the background whenever she's on stage.
When you were no more than a babe, your father...
It's in the melody that Rapunzel sings because remember, she's in that tower because the baker's dad stole the beans in the first place. So she's there because of the beans, ergo bean theme in her song.
I would, but I can't.
wanted to pay a visit, she called forth.
Till you're climbing her hair and you see her up there as you're nearing her, all the while hearing her. Ah.
You can hear it when Jack sings about the castle in the sky because he got there via the beanstalk. The melody's core is just the bean motif.
There are giants in the sky. There are big, tall, terrible giants in the sky. Big, tall, terrible giant at the door.
You can hear it in this scene that kind of gives everything away when the old man, which we don't know is the baker's father at this point, bothers the baker right after the witch cuts off Rapunzel's hair. Everything about what's happening on stage right there all revolves around this bean situation. And again, you hear it basically every time the witch is singing.
Don't you know what's out there in the world? Someone has to shield you from the world.
All right, now I'm just going to out myself here. This next section is one of my favorite moments in all of music theater history ever. And I just kind of want to prep you for that. Okay, so check it out. As far as I'm concerned, Sondheim is kind of a master of developing his musical ideas and taking these little musical fragments and just bending them and reshaping them all over the place. If you've seen my video on Sweeney Todd, then you know what I'm talking about.
Eventually, when you get to the big moments, there is a sense of structure because you've been using the material that you've been setting up all the way through. I found, incidentally, it sounds so pretentiously intellectual, but in fact, what it does is save you a huge amount of work. Because if you can take, I got this idea, and I got this idea, and I got it. Now I'm going to build a score. You don't have to invent very much, do you? You take this one and you turn it upside down, and it's a new tune. You take this one, you take the harmonies and say, instead of major, let's make it minor. and suddenly it's a new song. You take this one, and everybody says, oh, see how he held the score together.
So what's so fascinating to me here is how Sondheim manages to utilize this Bean theme in so many different contexts without losing its sense of musical identity. There's a quote from Understanding the Leitmotif by Matthew Bribitzer-Stull that I absolutely love. Themes themselves can be lovely, powerful, heart-wrenching, or foreboding, but it is only in their development that we experience a sense of progress through musico-dramatic or musico-narrative time. If your music is telling the story, then it should change with the ebb and flow of how that story unfolds, right? We hear the Bean theme in countless contexts, in all kinds of different situations, sung by basically every single member of the cast in some way at some point in this show. Each instance feels somewhat unique without ever losing track of the fact that it's the Bean theme. I feel like that alone is an amazing accomplishment. But one of the ways I think he does this is that for the most part, you always hear the Bean theme in order, those 5 critical notes.
What are you doing there?
Oh, nothing, I swear, just passing by.
I touched that hair! Don't you understand? I cannot have touched the ingredients!
The corn!
Now, in what I've been able to find, you'll always hear them in that specific order, except for 2 specific moments.
There's just a few notes that accompanies her when she's telling them about this, but the top notes are going... And then by putting a combination of those notes together, we get this chord, which coincides with the first task. 1, the cow as white as milk.
1, the cow as white as milk. 2, the cape as red as blood.
This chord, which is always associated with a witch and always associated with 4 objects, is opposed to the... These are and will represent the beans, the magic beans.
Now, this is really interesting. Think about it. Why does the witch's mother tell her not to mess with the beans in her garden?
You see, when I had inherited that garden, my mother had warned me that I would be punished if I were ever to lose any of the beans. The special beans.
Of all the plants, why is it the beans that affect the witch's powers? Why is it that when the witch throws all the beans away, she also vanishes? Similarly, it's the witch's magic, or her beans, that really initiates all the conflict in the show.
But we have no bread.
Of course you have no bread.
What do you wish?
It's not what I wish. It's what you wish.
So when you think about it, it feels like the witch using her magic, which came from the beans, really started all the conflict in the show to begin with. And then the second place that we hear the bean motif really transform is right here at the very end of the show.
The other thing is that, of course, this is where the bean theme finally becomes calm. It's neither sinister anymore, nor is it agitated. It is, though it's in the accompaniment only, you hear it suddenly as... And it's at its most simple, harmonically, and at its most legato.
Sometimes people leave you halfway through the wood. Others may deceive you. You decide what's good.
But if, as you rehearse it, you think of it that way, and you think of the bean theme as finally having come to some kind of resolution and underlying this song, then both, although it sounds symbolic, both emotionally and symbolically, it will feel as if the story has been resolved, because the story, in a sense, is about the bean theme and how all the beans which caused all this mischief have finally come to fruition here. They will kill the giant in a moment or two, and it will become a resolution. And also, I'd like to point out that when you're singing the release of the second part, when they're all singing together, people make mistakes. It's going like this. And that, of course, is the inversion of the bean theme. It's the upside-down version of... So that everything finally comes together in one song.
People make mistakes. Fathers,
Mothers,
people make mistakes.
Holding to their own, thinking they're alone.
And this moment is not for nothing. This is the exact moment where the cast realizes their responsibility and seizes control over their mistakes. Just before this moment, the baker completely loses his nerve and runs away, only to bump into the ghost of his father, who convinces him to not make the same mistake he did, and they all end up not pointing fingers at each other, and they accept a communal responsibility for what's happened. It doesn't matter whose fault it is, people make mistakes, and it's up to us to fix it. The buck stops here. In inverting the bean sequence, I feel it functions like an inverted waveform. They cancel each other out. In this moment, when they decide to accept responsibility for their actions, here's the moment where they've truly managed to undo the witch's magic that's been persisting and propagating throughout every aspect of all of these characters' lives. In every other instance of the bean motif, at least the ones that I could find, it more or less sounds like you can hear that bean theme in its prime form, those 5 notes in that order. Now, there might be a new harmonic context, maybe it's slower or it's been rhythmically altered, maybe it's developed into an entire melody, but you hear those 5 notes in that order. And this continuation of the bean theme, at least to me, represents the continuation of the witch's magic and the source of the conflict that the cast of characters are unable to resolve. It persists for so long in its prime form, in the same order of notes, because these characters spend most of the show unable to learn or really change.
No.
So it's your fault.
No.
Yes, it is.
It's not.
It's true.
Wait a minute, but I only stole the gold to get my cow back from you.
So it's your fault.
Yes.
No, it isn't.
Think about it. Nobody really learns anything until the very end of the show. They make their selfish wishes, and they lie and cheat and steal and attack, and even till the end of the show, they are literally pointing fingers at each other and not accepting responsibility for their actions. They haven't learned a thing, and they aren't bettering themselves. The circumstances surrounding the witch and her curse are completely unchanged. Everyone is more or less continuing the cycle. The baker is just as selfish as his father, and the witch makes a point to bring this up.
You're so nice. You're not good, you're not bad, you're just nice. I'm not good, I'm not nice, I'm just right. I'm the hitch, I'm what no one believes, I'm the witch. You're all liars and thieves like his father, like his son will be too, oh why bother?
Nothing's really changing. So what happens is through varying levels of transformation, development, and variation, Sondheim has been able to tell this story through one critical motif. It comes from the witch, which is why we're able to hear those notes come from this vertical structure that represents the witch's magic. And then that critical motif is put through all kinds of different musical and dramatic contexts, where it feels and functions slightly differently every time you hear it, all while maintaining its salience as the bean theme. When you hear it, you recognize that it's the bean theme. Right up until this moment where, instead of utilizing it in a reharmonization or a new rhythmic pattern or something like that, Sondheim inverts it, one of the most substantial transformations we've seen of that motif yet, in a way that directly challenges the way that we've heard that motif in its presentation at every other point in the show, since first hearing it with the witch. Through this intensely controlled sense of development and transformation, Sondheim has managed to communicate the central moral of the show through a single motif alone. I don't think I've ever seen a score do something like that before, which, at least to me, is why it's one of my favorite moments in musical theater ever. This is the moment where the cast of characters actually, genuinely learn something profound that Sondheim and Lapine felt was necessary to say and show to a generation of children who will listen. There's no such thing as a happily ever after, because there's always something new to learn, especially if you're listening to Sondheim. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank my patrons for making these videos possible. An extra special thank you to Abby Rose, Alec Kulkowski, Alex Klinkert, Always Posh, Amaranth, Andy Muse, Artemy, hey Artemy, R2 Dantu, Ariella Jaglam, Basu Gasu, Baku Hatsu, Bakumatsu, Bentastic Mr. Ben, Brent Dubrock, Brunhilda, Charlie Holly, Christian, Darren Almgren, Dawn Marie Curran, Dokos, Edith with the Man Hands, Elorira, Elise and Thomas Constantine. Every time Sideways says for the Horde, another Horde leader dies. Oh no. Fenwise and Tome, for the Horde. Oh god. Fricky Poo, Free Anne, G7G, Gable Larson, Genevieve, Google It, Gregory Holderness, Hayden Jontro, Hazel J. Hollick, Huen Tu Dao. I want you to tell me if my fear is justified that no one will pay attention to me if I'm honest about my addiction to ice cream. I was going to use a really long name because it's funny, but decided not to. You're welcome. Thank you. I'm here to learn about leitmotifs, so I sound interesting at parties. Jan von Fragstein, Jason Kim, Joe Engel, John Egbert, Joseph Spiros, Josh Backday, Justice for the Dies Irae and Andrew Lambert, Justin Hurley, Justin Sargent, Karen Rosenau, Katie O, Knight of Chaos, I like that, Kobolds, Korak, Let the truth be known. 49, 20, 73, 65, 63, 72, 65, 74, 6C, 79, 20, 73, 75, 70, 76F, 72, 74, 20, 74, 68, 65, 20, 41, 6C, 6C, 69, 61, 6E, 63, 65, 21. Literal Ghost, Looney, Michael Hubbard, Mike Wisnick, Mr. Kamisama, Myron John Tatarin, Nicole, Nicholas Coent, Prelok, Ra Ra Rasputin, Russia's greatest heat machine, Rachel Augsburger, Rafael Martinez Salas, Raquel Monterosa, Raven Horn, Rich Marzullo, Ryan Vick, Snaps Guys Tell Sideways to Stream More, Scuba Doos, Sebastian Canino, also known as Cinemageddon Reviews, Source 41, Stephen H., Stupid Dog, Sydney Fox, Tabitha Ockelford, Take That, Rewind It Back, Sideways Music Theory, Make Your Brain Cells Go Clap, Terra Fimiera. They wanted me to stop referencing Sideways every 5 minutes. Little do they know, friends are temporary and leitmotifs are eternal. This name thing is getting out of hand, and I think everyone should probably stop. Transpanic Power Hour, Vox, You Are Loved, You Are Valid, You Deserve to Live, You Are Not the Exception, Morgan Loberg, I changed my name so I could be a part of the fun, You Shall Call Me the Pumpkin Queen, and Rue. I'd like to thank everybody who requested that I talk about Into the Woods. I really love it. This has just honestly been me just gushing about one of my favorite musicals. If you like what you saw here, be sure to check out my other videos and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch to have your musical questions answered live. And if you really like what I'm doing, then consider supporting the channel on Patreon. But that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching.